feeding everyone sustainably. It's a huge challenge, right? Especially now with climate change really hitting hard and so much malnutrition still out there.
It really is, and it's kind of strange when you stop and think.
Yeah.
Well, we know about thousands of edible plants, but humanity mostly relies on just, what, three? Rice, wheat, maize, for almost everything.
Exactly. And that narrow focus, that dependence, it makes our whole food system pretty vulnerable, doesn't it?
Definitely. And leaves a lot of people short on essential nutrients.
Right. Which leads us perfectly into what we're diving into today. We're exploring these neglected and underutilized species, NUS, or sometimes people call them UUCs, underutilized crops.
These are the plants that are often, on the sidelines,
Yeah.
overlooked. But the research we've been digging through suggests they have this huge potential, maybe even critical potential right now.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we've gathered a whole set of recent research papers, stuff that scientists are publishing now.
Yeah, trying to get a real handle on why these species might be so important for the future of food, for nutrition, all of it.
And one of the first things that really jumps out looking at these sources is how much more attention researchers are finally paying to them.
Oh, yeah. There's been a definite uptick.
Since around 2018, 2019, you see this surge in publications and just a steady growth rate overall in the research. One paper mentioned, over 6% annual growth, quadrupling in 2 decades.
Another one pointed out 2021 had the highest number of articles ever. It really feels like the scientific community is waking up to them.
Like they're realizing solutions might have been hiding in plain sight all along.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that this research boom lines up exactly with our growing worries about climate change, about food security.
It's like they're connecting the dots, seeing these overlooked plants as potential answers.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's unpack that core problem the research talks about. This really narrow diet we have globally, relying so heavily on just a few big staples.
It leads to really monotonous diets for millions of people, particularly, in developing countries where those staples just dominate everything.
And the consequences of that.
They're significant. Widespread nutritional deficiencies, malnutrition. One paper really stressed how protein deficiency can affect brain development, even in fetuses. That's serious.
Wow.
And it's not just protein. It's essential minerals, vitamins, things that just aren't abundant in basic rice or wheat or maize diets. They're missing.
And it's not just human health, right? It impacts the agricultural system itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
By focusing so much on the big crops, we've lost a massive amount of agricultural genetic diversity. Indigenous species get pushed aside.
Which makes the whole system less resilient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Less able to cope with shocks. Think new pests, diseases, or the extreme weather climate change is throwing at us. It's that classic all eggs in one basket problem, but huge global scale.
Yeah, you need diversity for robustness.
You do, in any ecosystem, natural or farmed.
Okay, so where do these neglected species, the NUS and UECs, fit in? This is where the research starts to get really exciting.
This is the opportunity. And first off, source after source calls them nutritional powerhouses.
Powerhouses, how so?
They often pack a punch with nutrients that are scarce in the big staples. We're talking high-quality protein, a much wider range of amino acids, those crucial building blocks.
Like in legumes?
Yeah, things like bambra groundnut come up a lot,
Yeah.
rich in those essential amino acids, so they could directly tackle some of those deficiencies we just mentioned.
Yes.
Vitamins. You see mentions of A, C, E, especially in tropical fruits from trees, and then a whole spectrum of minerals, iron, zinc, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, manganese, sodium, selenium. The list goes on.
Wow.
Plus fiber, good fats, carbs, and these beneficial plant compounds. Phenolics, antioxidants, carotenoids, anthocyanins that science keeps finding are really good for us.
Can you give us some specific examples the research highlighted?
Sure. The maramba bean from southern Africa kept coming up. Untapped source of protein, healthy fats, fiber, minerals like iron and zinc.
Okay.
Then from the Andes, things like mashua, aracacha, yakan, noted for minerals and other beneficial stuff. African leafy vegetables, loads of those healthy plant chemicals, phenolics, antioxidants,
Right.
and traditional fruits, especially from tropical trees, just packed with vitamins and antioxidants. The papers really emphasize the specific amino acids in legumes, too, and how vital they are for health, development, even reproduction.
And the research also mentioned something about preparation, how we cook them.
Yes, that's important, too. Traditional methods like malting grains or fermenting things, which are really common in Africa, can actually make the nutrients more available. They enhance digestibility.
So it's combining the plant's potential with local knowledge.
Exactly. Indigenous know-how is key there.
So great for nutrition, But beyond the plate, the research calls them climate champs. What does that mean?
Yeah, this is so relevant right now. It means they're often inherently resilient. They evolved in tough places, marginal lands, harsh conditions where the big staple crops really struggle.
What kind of conditions are we talking about? Drought?
Drought tolerance is a huge one. The sources list so many examples. Bembra groundnut, again, millets, pulses, even traditional African rice types. One that really stood out was the wild watermelon. Apparently, it can keep its photosynthesis going even in severe drought. Amazing.
Wow.
And some tolerate salty soils. Grass pea, Bembra groundnut again. Many just thrive in poor, degraded soils where you couldn't grow much else.
So they're basically pre-adapted for the kind of difficult conditions that are becoming more common because of climate change.
That's exactly it. And crucially, they often need fewer inputs. Less fertilizer, less water, compared to the conventional crops we've bred so intensively.
Which is a win for sustainability, too.
A big win. Less strain on resources.
Okay, and that leads into their eco-friendly side. How do they help the environment?
Well, when farmers integrate them into their systems, especially traditional systems like agroforestry, mixing trees and crops, or just home gardens, they help maintain or even boost biodiversity.
Right.
And many of the legumes are nitrogen fixers. They pull nitrogen from the air, put it in the soil, like free fertilizer, improves soil health naturally.
That's clever.
Yeah. And some species, like field cress, are even being looked at for cleaning up polluted soil, reducing reliance on chemical fertilizers.
And didn't the research also mention using other parts of the plants, stuff we might normally waste?
Yes, there's potential there too. Using the leftover biomass stalks, leaves, etc., for making valuable chemicals, maybe even biofuels.
Good examples.
They mentioned things like sago waste, Napier grass, rice husks, even using leftover fruit peels as natural weed killers, bioherbicides. Lots of potential for a circular approach.
Okay, so good for nutrition, good for climate resilience, good for the planet. And they're also deeply tied to communities, is that right?
Absolutely. This came through really strongly in the research. They are vital for local livelihoods, for income, for food security, especially for small-scale farmers, rural households, particularly in parts of Asia and Africa.
How so?
They offer different income streams, different food sources,
Right.
which is critical during the lean seasons when the main staple crops might not be ready or available.
Right, fill the gap.
Exactly. The shea tree in West Africa is a perfect example. It fruits in the dry season. Women often collect and process the nuts, and the income helps families get through that tougher period.
The connection to culture seems really important, too.
It is. Many of these plants are deeply woven into local food systems, traditions, cultural heritage in Africa and Asia.
And not just in rural areas.
No, the research points to potential for urban food security, too. Things like promoting home gardening with these species, even making use of urban green spaces for foraging some edible plants.
It sounds like these plants are just incredible, offering solutions left, right, and center. So with all this potential, the nutrition, the resilience, the environmental benefits, the community support, why are they still neglected? Why are they still, under the radar for the most part?
Yeah, that's the big puzzle, isn't it? And the research dives into several reasons. Historically, there's just been a massive lack of scientific attention.
Really? On basic stuff.
Yeah, fundamental things. Their genetics, the best ways to grow them in different places, that's agronomy, their precise water needs, detailed nutrient breakdowns. It's improving now, like we said earlier, but there's a lot of catching up to do.
And where was the knowledge then?
Often held within indigenous communities, passed down through generations, or sometimes it's in what scientists call gray literature, like old reports, local documents, things not in the big international journals. Harder to access.
So the formal science is only just starting to catch up and validate what people on the ground knew already.
In many cases, yes.
Yeah.
And then there are technical hurdles, too. Some seeds are trying to germinate. Getting them to sprout consistently could be hard. Yields might be lower or less predictable than the big, highly bred staples.
Okay.
They can be susceptible to certain pests or diseases that maybe haven't been studied much. And yes, some do naturally contain compounds you wouldn't want to eat in large amounts, anti-nutrients, or even toxins.
Toxins? Like what?
Well, grass pea is a classic example. It has a neurotoxin.
Yeah.
But traditional processing-specific soaking, drying, makes it safe. It requires that knowledge. Certain cannavelia beans have something called cannavanine. Again, needs proper preparation.
So you need the know-how to use them safely and effectively.
Absolutely. Which ties back to valuing that traditional knowledge.
And then there are the bigger picture issues. Markets, policies.
Right. Often there just isn't much market demand because people don't know about them or they aren't readily available in shops. There isn't the infrastructure, processing facilities, distribution networks.
Hmm.
Initial investment can be high, especially for tree crops that take years before you get a harvest. And for small farmers, not having secure rights to their land makes planting long-term crops like trees feel risky.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And crucially, they often lack policy support. They aren't prioritized in national farming strategies, or sometimes even in big global goals like the Sustainable Development Goals. They fall through the
So
cracks.
it's this whole mix: research gaps, technical issues, market barriers, policy neglect.
And social factors, too.
Hmm.
Cultural preferences often lean towards the globally promoted staples. Sometimes that's influenced by history, like colonial attitudes that look down on indigenous foods.
It's a really complex web holding them back.
It is.
And the research also warned that just promoting them isn't automatically risk-free if it's not done carefully.
Yes, that's an important nuance. While promoting diverse native species is generally great, if global demand suddenly spikes for one particular crop, say, a tree crop, and leads to unplanned rapid expansion.
Like a monoculture.
Exactly. It can ironically cause deforestation or biodiversity loss.
Mhm.
We've seen that happen with things like cacao or palm oil in some places.
Right.
So the way we promote and develop them has to be sustainable and thoughtful.
Right. So, okay, how do we break through all these barriers? What's the path forward that the research suggests? How do we unlock all that potential?
Well, more research is definitely key,
Mm.
especially using modern tools like genomics, studying the plant's entire genetic makeup.
Like DNA sequencing.
Yeah, things like next-generation sequencing, it helps scientists quickly find the genes responsible for useful traits, better nutrition,
Hmm.
tolerance to drought or salt, disease resistance.
Which helps with breeding better varieties.
Exactly, whether that's through traditional breeding methods or more modern ones. And we also need more basic agronomic research, how best to grow these plants in specific local conditions. Plus, really understanding their natural habitats is vital for both conservation and cultivation.
So a combination of high-tech lab work and really practical field science.
Precisely. But that science needs backup. It needs strategic policies.
From governments.
Governments, NGOs, development agencies. Support to integrate these NUSUCs into the mainstream, developing market channels, making sure farmers see them as viable, maybe even profitable options, not just something for subsistence.
And getting them into supply chains.
Right. And central to all of this, the research stresses, is the knowledge held by local communities.
Indigenous knowledge again.
It's critical.
Yeah.
We need to recognize it, value it, and really leverage it for conservation, for sustainable management, for figuring out the best ways to use these plants.
And working with communities, not just extracting knowledge.
Absolutely. Establishing genuine partnerships, making sure indigenous communities are involved in research and development right from the start, respecting their knowledge, their rights, their priorities. That's essential.
What about protecting the plants themselves, the genetic diversity?
That's vital too. Investing in conservation. Many of these species are vulnerable. They might not have formal seed systems like major crops do, especially tropical trees.
So seed banks.
Seed banks, yes, but also conserving them in their natural environments or on farms. And developing ways to get good quality seeds to farmers who want to grow them. Protecting that biodiversity is crucial for the future.
And bringing it back down to the community level, you mentioned livelihoods earlier. There's economic potential here, too.
Oh, absolutely. Developing small businesses, maybe even larger ones, around processing and marketing these indigenous and traditional foods that creates jobs, generates income. It can really boost local economies and improve overall food security. Agripreneurship, based on these unique resources.
This deep dive, looking through all this research, it really highlights this incredible potential, doesn't it? Still so much untapped, sitting in these neglected species.
It really does. The sources are clear. These aren't just alternative foods. They're not just news crops for enthusiasts. They hold real keys to tackling some of our biggest global problems.
Better nutrition.
More sustainable farming, agriculture that can actually cope better with climate change.
Stronger local economies, stronger cultures.
It's exactly. Especially in the parts of the world that often face the biggest challenges with food security and climate impacts.
So thinking about the huge task ahead, feeding everyone sustainably on a changing planet, making sure people get the nutrition they need, and then considering this amazing potential that's been hiding in plain sight in these overlooked plants, what does this deep dive make you, listening now, think about the future of food, maybe even the food on your own plate, and perhaps the real value we place, or should place, on the incredible diversity of plants our planet offers?